Hey, more than workers. And I don't know, do people like being called that? I haven't gotten any feedback really, so I think more than workers is okay with you guys. Mark Maron, who I'm kind of modeling now this intro thing after, although I'm not as funny or probably interesting as him, has the WTF podcast, so he calls his people something else. But I think More Than Workers is pretty nice. So MTW is my podcast, and More Than Work, and you guys are More Than Workers. But anyway, I was listening to Marin quite a few times in the last week. He did an interview with Jodie Foster that was awesome, and Sam Neill, and I'm listening to Melissa Leo right now. And they're all so great, and I love the way he interacts and the conversations he has, and I can only aspire to do that, really. And I don't know, I feel like sometimes I get a little bit close to having conversations like he is that get pretty deep. This is one that I think is really special. It's with Sandee Kastrul. She's a person I met because in the last year, I was looking at my life a bit and just thinking about my purpose. And I do think my purpose is to serve. My core values are very clear. I've actually done more to clarify them recently. But service is really important to me. So one way I'm serving is this podcast. I hope that people are getting out of it what I'm intending they get out of it, and probably more. I hope you're getting more also. I hope it's just not my will that's coming across, but really that you're learning about people that you're finding interesting, or that you're learning about subjects you just didn't know about, and you're starting to think of ways that you might change or you might do something. And maybe, you were listening to Seba last week and you've been thinking about skateboarding, you want to try. Now, please don't hold me responsible for any broken bones, but go try it. Or, some people were trying rollerblading last year. I see some rollerbladers in the park here in London. Or maybe, you just wanted to start writing in a journal and you haven't done that. And now it's something you're like, oh yeah, you know what? It's not too late to do anything. So anyway, I met Sandee because one of my best friends who I went to when I was kind of starting to do this soul searching, is on the board of some nonprofits, and he's on the board of her nonprofit. She's a president and co-founder of a technology and leadership nonprofit. And he just reached out to her and said, hey, I have this friend, Rabia. Would you be willing to give her any advice you have about going into nonprofit or things like that? And so she ended up saying, yeah, and let me talk to her, basically. I won't scare her away. And so we ended up having this wonderful conversation. And I had started up the podcast at the time. And so I invited her to be on it. And so we were able to coordinate this interview. And she is just truly a remarkable woman. And the things she says, the things we talk about. Sarah Robinson had a conversation with me a little bit the other week about anti-racism. And this conversation gets into a bit more about equity and equity in hiring as well. And I think these conversations are so important to have, and they're so important to hear. And I'm really I'm just so proud that there's a space that maybe someone's going to hear a conversation about this that maybe they wouldn't have. And also I'm really honored that these people are taking the time to talk to me about these things. And, my podcast will range, right? So you'll hear different episodes about different stuff. This one is about this awesome organization. It's about this woman and her career. And it's really about all of us. And it's about what we can do and how we can contribute in our communities. I've done some volunteer work with I.c.stars, the organization. So it was just so cool, because it's hard to go into some organizations and feel like you're able to really lend your skills to help them. And a lot of us think about volunteering in organizations as maybe standing at a cheering line at a event, a walk or something, or handing out flyers. But the opportunities that I.c.stars creates to volunteer are amazing. I was able to help some people with their resumes. Like, some of these people maybe created a resume for the first time, so got to just help them with that. Most people who are going to listen to this could probably help people with resumes and do that work. I just got to do coffee in a chat. And then there's like mock interviews. So it's all cool stuff that professionals can do to contribute that maybe you didn't think about. So I encourage anyone who's interested in doing that kind of work to look them up after the podcast. the letters I and C, stars.org. But anyway, I'll probably should get to the podcast soon because you didn't really, download this to listen to me talk for 10 minutes or something. I just want to say that this past week, it was really hard watching the things in Texas that occurred in Oklahoma, and just the weather and the people dying and the failure of the power grid and the state infrastructure and the irresponsibility of some people, but then the beautiful acts of others, and seeing people in communities taking care of each other, and seeing people around the country chipping in to try to help. And it's hard not to focus on the negative of that situation when there's a lot of good people. I think AOC raised $5 million. That's just all people donating. That's grassroots. That's people caring about Texas. Beto O'Rourke arranged to do wellness checks on people. A lot of the local community leaders, churches, and a mattress store, like a furniture store, opened up their doors. And I think that's all fantastic. I hope that, just the people who lost loved ones. I mean, there's been so much loss in the last year with COVID. There are people who have died of COVID. There are people who have died because of COVID. There are people whose last days have been spent in isolation. All that's really hard. And I just hope that the people are now healing. I really hope that the state gets the infrastructure worked out, because it's terrible. And, Texas, I lived in Texas for 2 years. It wasn't the place for me. It just didn't reflect my values. And I'm too much of an empath and too sensitive of a person, honestly, to be in a place where I just can't really find my people and can't find a way to contribute very much. I mean, I did volunteering, voter registration and stuff like that, but it was hard for me to live there. But there are good people there. It's a huge state. It's got a lot of resources. There are amazing places there. Austin's one of my favorite cities of any, and probably somewhere I'd live if it didn't get so hot. It gets really hot. So we heard about the cold, but it gets, really, really hot in that kind of place. And I thought about living there and ended up back in California when I was leaving Texas. But, I just wanted to kind of recognize that this was a rough week for a lot of people, and I hope everyone's staying well. I'm getting my vaccine tomorrow, so maybe next week I'll talk about that if I remember to do that. I'm getting my first dose of the COVID vaccine here in London, and I'm just completely excited about it because I don't think it's going to change anything. And it's kind of like the 2021, nothing changed when it was like 2020 one minute and 2021 the next. We're still in lockdown, and we're still all wearing a mask and isolating and everything. But it's just going to make me feel a little bit closer to feeling a little bit better about myself, and also just how I can actually, getting a vaccine, I think, is positive for the community too, because the more people that are vaccinated, the more protected more people are against the virus and less passing of it. I'll still have to wear a mask. I'll still be under whatever restrictions there are in the UK, but I'm really just stoked to get out tomorrow, hop on my bike, and ride over to the vaccination center. So, yeah, that was a lot. I'm probably going to have to listen back to know everything I said because I went off script as usual. But thanks for being a listener. I really hope you enjoyed this interview with Sandee Kastrul. And by the way, you can go to anchor.fm/morethanworkpod, and you could record like a message if you want to me, like about feedback, or if you have guest ideas or anything, or just, shoot me an email or leave me feedback. I'd really love to hear what people are thinking of the podcast. I have some amazing guests coming up, and I'm already booking the next season. So that's really cool. So thanks again for listening and for being here. Welcome to More Than Work, the podcast reminding you that your self-worth is defined by more than your job title. I'm Rabia, an IT project manager, comedian, nonprofit volunteer, and sometimes activist. Every week, I'll chat with a guest about pursuing passions outside of work or creating meaningful opportunities inside the workplace. As you listen, I hope you'll be inspired to do the same. Thanks for joining me again this week, everyone. It's nice to have whoever's listening to the podcast right now to be here because I have Sandee Kastrul. She's president and co-founder of I.c.stars. And I'm really excited to bring you this guest and glad she's taken the time out of her day to be here. Hey, Sandee.
Hey, it's so good to be here. And thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, good. Well, not good, but yeah, thanks for being here. Good for being here. Yeah, so you just want to introduce yourself a little bit and maybe talk about I.c.stars?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm the co-founder of I.c.stars, and we've been at this work for over 20 years, which is crazy to even think about. And I.c.stars is a technology leadership and business training program for underserved and underrepresented young adults. And we do a 4-month boot camp intensive technology leadership training where each cohort is given a business problem to solve by a Fortune 500 client. Then they're divided up into 4 different teams. They form their own consulting companies, and then they're competing with each other for this RFP. So they're building really cool software. It's different every cohort. So the skills are constantly being updated as with technology that's always changing. Mm-hmm. And we're able to script in leadership objectives in the project so that not only are folks learning how to program, how to build things, but they're also learning how to become consultants. So how do I work with a client? How do I gather requirements? How do I deal with conflict on my team or with my client? And so lots of juicy things that are baked in to the learning experience.
Yeah, I feel like I could benefit from that now, and I've been consulting for quite a while. I mean, that's not something you learn really anywhere unless you're on the job for the most part, so that's really cool. Has anything changed like over the last 20 years as other than technology itself, but have your lessons changed? Like there's been evolutions that I've seen in like leadership, thought leadership and stuff like that.
Yeah, what a great question, because you're right. It's like technology is ever changing, right? Like I even think about the technologies that we were teaching in 2000 versus today. Like back in 2000, we were teaching everybody to be HTML programmers, right? Because every company needed a website. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, today we've swung all the way back to like front end development. So it's kind of funny, like, in between those two endpoints, there was a whole lot of data, business analysts, so it's interesting. Like it does move and change, but I think what's so good about your question is what else has changed? And frankly, I think that what we're really good at is teaching about the beauty and the art of change. So we're developing changemakers or change agents as they build the systems that are going to change our business. And then we use that same blueprint to develop change agents in our community. So what's in the middle are people who can think from a systems level. And systems thinkers, that's what technology is. At the end of the day, you're solving problems and building solutions. And then how do we take that and use that to develop community leaders who are then implementing change in the communities that we come from? So I would say, to answer your question, we have really dug into teaching the art and the beauty of change. And it kind of starts with us, right? Like if we can kind of embrace change for ourselves, then we can enact change for others. And that means like really teaching introspection and kind of how do we anchor ourselves? And really, what are we on this planet to do? What's our mission, our personal mission? And being able to define that and to help people see through their mission to what their gifts are, and then where they want to deploy their gifts. So, the funny thing about being an entry-level technologist is coming out of a boot camp is you just want a job, right? Like you want to get to work and not every job is going to be the right job for you, right? And so where do we want to bring our gifts? So looking at the bigger picture, what is the company? What does it produce? What are their values? And do their values show up in their actions? And it's a great time to be thinking about all of those things as we see what's happening in the world too.
That's true. And I do think, just as someone I'm not looking for a job right now, and I probably wouldn't say if I was anyway, just because I'm posting this. But I think, but I remember like last time for the job I'm currently at, I mean, I was kind of being aspirational about where I was going, because I had actually been at a company that I thought was the place for me to be. Like everything, it checked all the boxes. And I really weighed out like, oh, they have, community involvement. That was a big thing, and good employee relations, stuff like that. And then when I got into that company, they weren't practicing those things. I mean, they were involved in the community, but the leaders I had directly above me were not practicing those things like valuing the employees. And so the next place I went, I didn't want it to be like that. And where I'm at now is pretty cool because we're pretty autonomous. We get to work with all different clients, but also like some of the vision like I have is aligned, right? And I can, say, okay, I'm proud to be where I am, where I'm working. Yeah. But I think when you first start out, you don't even know to do that. You're right. You're just looking for a job. So for people to even learn that and to be aware of that is really awesome. Like right out the gate, Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think, once we sort of know ourselves and we can really evaluate companies based on, those kinds of things like values and whether or not the actions reflect them, that, I think there's like three different types of companies. So there's like the company that's focused on innovation. And you can see it in the products or services that they produce, but also in the team, right? Like, are they iterating? Are they doing customer interviews? Are they constantly thinking, how can we do this better? Is there like sort of a, it's good enough kind of thing? Do they have an innovation process? And then there are the companies that are focused on operational excellence. So these are the companies who, they're focused on, can we do more? Can we do better? How do we maximize our resources? Like the utilities, for example, it's less about profit margin and more about how can we do more with less. And then I think, the third type of company is all about customer satisfaction. So, right, like how are we customizing our product or our service for our very specific customers. Like, if you remember the old Burger King commercial, have it your way, or Starbucks, like that idea of customizing your burger, your coffee for every customer differently was kind of radical and revolutionary when it happened. And so if you think about, okay, so where do I want to work? Do I want to be in the midst of innovation? So constantly learning and changing and growing in a very fast pace? Or do I want to kind of be in a very stable industry and focus on operational excellence? Or am I more about relationships and people and a customer satisfaction kind of thing? And I think like that's the whole next layer about how do we select where we want to give our gifts.
Yeah. No, I really like looking at it that way. I think one thing I was thinking just now is, do you have a person or maybe a couple of people that over the last 20 years where you saw them go from a certain place to somewhere where you're like, wow, this is why we are doing this program, because look at what this woman or man has done. Do you have an example of that?
Oh, yes. I have many. It's hard to pick. Like, it's like Sophie's Choice, So I'll just say, I'll say that, every day I am inspired by one of our alums who comes back and volunteers and teaches what they know, who, opens up a community center, who is, just killing it in their job. And I think that it's what makes it really special and sticky is that, traditional workforce development means that you need to develop a skill or a behavior or a connection. And so you go to a place, you learn the skill, you make the connection, you move on, and you don't look back. In fact, you try to get as far away from that organization as possible because that's a reminder of when you weren't whole. And I think that doesn't really work because it's not a complete cycle and it doesn't foster reciprocity. So in our world, we're looking at you don't really know something until you teach someone else. And that we define leadership as making opportunities for others. So all of our graduates have a plan for the opportunities they're going to make in their business and in their community. And so those are the stories that inspire me the most. And so, when we're talking about developing leaders, we're basically talking about three types of leaders. The civic leader who's looking at things from a systems level and impacting the policies that impact our communities. The business leader who's an entrepreneur, who's starting new businesses, who's poking holes in the glass ceiling, making opportunities for others through business, and then hiring from the community. And then service leaders who are being visible in the community as mentors, as teachers, as coaches. They're setting up labs. They're teaching, technology or digital literacy classes. And that those three types of leaders are going to be the change agents who impact our policies, our businesses, and our communities. And that having a set of shared experiences really kind of allows people to not be all siloed in their work, but take into account the full perspective. And that's kind of what I think about when I think about those ends meeting, right? Like, so now what are you going to do with it? Because education for the sake of knowledge is selfish. If you just learn something for you, it's selfish. It's not until you apply that or teach someone else that it has meaning.
That's true, because even in looking at a career, and again, like looking at someone who's more immature in their career and someone who's more mature, you learn at some point that sharing information benefits everybody, and holding on to it doesn't make you the most valuable player. It actually makes you kind of really not the best, certainly not a team player, but maybe not even the best player on your team at all, because it's just, you're the only one with it. Yeah.
And we all know that subject matter expert who's a jackass, we know that person who's like, they're brilliant, but they're just impossible to be around. They're kind of selfish. They put up walls. They're, you don't
even want to ask them. Like, you're like, I know they're the SME, but I actually will do whatever I can to not ask them.
Right.
Because they're so unpleasant. Yeah. So who is like the person that joins I.c.stars as a cohort and goes through the program?
Yeah. So, I said earlier it was underserved and underrepresented. And a lot of times we mix those two up. Like we think, underserved is underrepresented, and it's not. Underrepresented is, of course, people of color who we don't see in our industry and technology. And then underserved is people who are coming from low-income communities without access to opportunities. And so our belief is that people who have faced adversity have developed resiliency. And that resiliency that's developed becomes this toolkit for survival. But and it has, critical thinking skills and creativity and reciprocity and chutzpah, all of these things that happen. And then the magical thing is that these are the very skills that are needed to be a programmer, to be an entrepreneur, and to be a community leader. And so we look for resiliency. We look for folks who have overcome obstacles. The traditional or the typical intern, we call our students interns, is someone who has responsibilities outside of themselves. Maybe, they're taking care of kids or a parent or something. And they are typically between like 18 and 27. Though we don't have an age cap. So, we've had people in their 40s and 50s do I.c.stars. And they're typically a musical learner. So someone who can read music, who's musically gifted, people who English may be their second language.
Mm-hmm.
Again, so you're starting to see this profile of somebody who's very smart, maybe not traditionally smart, but because a person can speak more than one language, learning code is just another language. And so they're very quick. They've got a process for learning that language. Maybe they've had 1 year of college, some college, but then had to drop out for financial reasons or to take care of someone else.
Mm-hmm.
People who have GEDs or high school diplomas. But I think, and maybe a passion for technology, but more than anything, a passion for making change, being a change maker.
Yeah, so it ends up, though it sounds like a very small, specific category of people, it ends up becoming a lot of people. It's kind of nice in a way that like underrepresented and underserved becomes this really broad umbrella rather than, very niched and siloed within itself or something.
Yeah.
So I kind of think that's pretty cool. So now what brought you, so you're passionate about change makers, leaders and everything, and you're one of those. And so what brought you, and I know already the answer because we've talked before, but what brought you to I.c.stars or to create I.c.stars with your co-founder?
So the story I love to tell is, and if you'll indulge me in this, so I was a science teacher, a math and science teacher. And my classroom for chemistry, we didn't have a lab. We didn't have, jack, basically. But we had plenty of imagination. And so the first thing I do on the first day is kind of pull down the periodic table and have everybody pick an element. And that's who you'd be for the whole semester. So if you were iron, I'd call you Effie. If you were gold, I'd be, hey, you. Thank you so much for laughing at my joke.
I like it. It sounds like, my friends' kids always say, tell us some kids' jokes. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I could teach them science.
See? Yes. And then I would say, all right, do you want to be a solid, a liquid, or a gas? So the cool kids are like, solid, and like some of the girls would be like, liquid. But the geeks who are thinking, where's she going with this? They would say gas. Now, imagine you're 17 years old and you just said to everyone, I want to be a gas, right? Like you're going to hear some sounds,
Yeah, for sure.
So immediately I separate the room, right? Like, so the solids would sit in the front row. And I'd say your molecules are packed tightly together and you will not move. Sometimes I would talk to them as if they weren't as smart as everybody else because, they were solids. And then for the liquids, I'd rope off a section of the classroom and I'd say, you have a little bit more mobility because your molecules are more spread out, but you'll always take the shape of your container. And the gases, of course, were free to move about, right? Like the molecules were spread out. If I left the door open, they could leave. They had all the freedom. And the truth is, it doesn't matter, where you grew up or what privilege you have. What every kid wants at 17 is freedom. And so immediately, the solids were like, well, that is not fair, and I'd say, well, then you have to change your state of matter. Or like class mobility, we have to change our state of mind. And so our journey through science is going to be about how to get all the freedoms that you want, but we're going to use the language of science to get there. And the hard part is that at the end of the day, you can't forget who you are. So for some of us to change our state of matter, it's going to be a lot easier, like heating, cooling, pressure. But for others, mercury, it's going to be a little harder. And so you're going to find out exactly who you are, what your superpowers are, and how you bond with other people in this class, right? Like whether it's going to be a covalent bond or an ionic bond, like friendship or a love bond, And what happens when you guys get together? And so, we had a lot of fun. My kids all did great. They were killing their tests and everything else. And it was human-centered education. It
Mm-hmm.
starts with the individual. And so my kids would come back and visit me, and and I'd always ask them, so what are you doing with your science? What's your truth? Like, science is the study of truth. And one day, the probably the most brilliant student I ever taught came back to visit. Brilliant, like the kid could figure out cold fusion. Like, he had a beautiful scientific mind. And so I'm excited. I said, "What are you doing? Are you smashing atoms? Like, what's going on?" And he says, "No, I'm working with chemicals. I work at a hotel downtown, doing cleaning services. And you'd be surprised at what people don't know about the basic properties of ammonia." And my heart was breaking. Like, here was this brilliant kid, and he's basically telling me that he's cleaning toilets, and he's cheerful about it. And by the way, he's not even making minimum wage because of his documentation status. And this is just ridiculous, like a waste. And just as I'm like going into my special place of, this is an injustice, what are he turns to me and he says, "Sandee, you're not listening. Like, you've always taught us that leadership is making opportunities for others. And so it shouldn't matter whether I'm in a lecture hall or I'm wearing a lab coat or I'm cleaning toilets. I'm teaching people just like you taught us." And that was it. I was like exploding head. And I remember walking down the street back to my office and thinking, like, my life is never going to be the same. Like, I have to address this now. Like, I'd had a really wonderful career as a teacher and an educational consultant. And this was the late 90s, right? Like, the world had been declared flat. There were .coms popping up everywhere. And, the sort of white middle class way of doing business was going to get disrupted big time, because we weren't just competing locally. We were going to be competing globally. And frankly, the rest of the world didn't look like the folks who are making the rules in our country today. And so they would need diverse people. They would need people who had that resilience. They would need people who could think outside of the box and all of that. And so it was just a really good time to introduce technology and leadership in the same frame to the world. And so that was really the impetus. And our first cohort, we had 100% placement. Everybody went to go work at .coms. They rode around on scooters. They ate Pop-Tarts all day, and then the bubble burst. And so we had to pivot from .coms and startups to, big, large enterprise IT companies, and so on.
Yeah. And were you in Chicago at that time?
Yeah. So this is all Chicago. Yep.
Okay. All Chicago. So one thing, and just for background for people, you and I spoke before because you were actually doing kind of a mentor call for me, which was really great, just about my career aspirations and that kind of thing. And so one thing you said to me during that call that just stuck with me, actually really profoundly stuck with me, was just about education, and education being where equity or inequity starts. And can you just, I think that's something I'd really like to talk with you about now. Yeah. So can you just talk more about that?
You bet. And I'm so passionate about this. I really think that the difference between great education and every other kind just boils down to two things. One is what we learn, and two is who we learn with. So what we learn, like, we have been learning the same way since the Industrial Revolution. And that is, answer the questions and then be tested on the knowledge that you've learned from reading the chapter. And that, frankly, that repetition and recitation is teaching us to work on an assembly line. right? Like to do the same things over and over again, to sort of be a part of this input output model of automation. Whereas kids in other schools, in affluent schools, in like cutting edge schools and great schools, they're not learning how to answer the questions. They're learning how to write the question themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're learning to be the leaders. They're learning to be the makers, the innovators. And it's a completely different way of learning. It's, it's Socratic. It is, learning to formulate an excellent question. And you know this from, being a consultant or project management, like the better your questions, the more you'll get.
Absolutely.
And then the second part is really like who we learn with. So if we go to school with kids whose parents are senators and CEOs, we have access to opportunities through that network. Well, kids if everybody works at the factory, if everybody's parents do, that's really all we see. That's all we have access to, and that's all we aspire to. And so I think those two things are huge. One is our social capital, and two is our intellectual capital, and whether we're learning to be reactive or proactive. And that, so in designing I.c.stars, it was about bringing both of those things together, really creating a methodology that makes makers, that develops makers, and then bringing an IT industry to the door of our interns. So, we have CIOs coming through I.c.stars almost every day for coming to have high tea. We do industry thought leader events. And, I would say in any given year, we have over 1,000 volunteers that plug in. And so we've shifted that paradigm from one teacher and many students to one student and many teachers. And that too is a very powerful way to sort of look at social capital and why not. And that education, as you said, is the ultimate equalizer, because it opens up opportunities for us. And so, right, like the more we know, the more we're able to imagine, the more we're able to see, and the more we're able to do. And so, equity in education, in my mind, is the foremost thing in really creating equity in our world.
Well, yeah, and we're seeing now with the fact that we're in a pandemic and a lot of learning has moved to distance learning or online learning, depending on where you are and what you have to call it. And even then, what you see, I see it. I'm in England, so I see it even here, but especially in the US, there are areas that don't even have access to the same speed of internet, right?
Yes.
And kids don't have access to a computer. And, the tired argument I've heard a few times, and I'll say it now, is, oh, sure, but people have cell phones. Well, you know what? You have to have a cell phone to do anything, to even get a job now. So that whole thing can just, like, anyone who says that can go fly a kite, quite honestly. Yeah. But it's like, there's an inequity there. Or people who, kids who are like maybe 3 kids live in one room or something like that because they don't have a big house where everyone can spread out. I mean, all these things are just kind of, I think, getting escalated more because people can't even go to a classroom right now.
Yeah. It's so incredibly true. So there's an access piece of it. But then there's also an engagement piece. Like we take for granted that everybody has a quiet place with a door that they can anchor themselves and do their work, whether that's, schoolwork or work. When it's just not true. And you're right. We're living in a pandemic. And, for our guys, this is the first time people have ever had a job where they could work from home, where they weren't doing, direct service. And so many of them feel guilty about watching their loved ones leave the house and go out in the pandemic infested world and do things. And that they're just sitting there in their slippers, coding. It just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah. No, that's actually interesting too, because I know I felt very lucky this whole time that like I've had work and I've had work that's remote anyway, so we didn't have to change. Yeah, a lot of people who work, they have to leave their homes
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
that. And then jobs that couldn't switch to that and people couldn't go to were lost, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's yeah.
And I think
So,
like one of the big lessons in the pandemic is for all of us to realize how much we're connected. Like
mhm.
it took us separating ourselves to realize just how much we're connected and how like even for us to be in our homes working from home and the blessings that come with that. There are, 20 people in one day that are working to make that so. From
Mhm.
the like sandwich delivery guy to, like everyone, all of the things that the people who are somewhat invisible to us, but they're
Mhm.
the conduit for getting what we need. And so we don't even see them. And so, right, like we are realizing just how much we are connected and the impact of one thing across the globe even is impacting us on
Sure.
the other side.
Yeah, and even to that point, like even the Amazon delivery person, or whoever's delivering for them, there's all kinds of people delivering for the same companies. But yeah, what would we all do if there was no one delivering a package to us, right? Like
Right? We would
people,
scream, we would rage.
yeah, we'd lose it. Like, oh, I needed a new keyboard or something, whatever, like, or
Yeah.
soda. It depends on what you order there, but that's what I order there.
Where's my Diet Coke?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So, how do you go about getting partners, like business partners? And what's been, I guess, the biggest maybe change too that you've seen over the last 20 years with that?
Yeah. So I think the interesting thing is, the difference between selling to startups and .coms versus, large enterprise companies is the time, right? Like
Mhm.
I remember back in 99, 2000, the other founder and I, we were just going out every night. Like we would have cocktails and like, the entrepreneur would write on a napkin how much money they were going to give us, like in the old school soap operas, like,
Yeah, there you go.
and then we'd be like, woo! And then there would be another round of drinks. And that was business development, um, versus, a very long sales cycle. And that what's motivating people to, as I call it, invest in I.c.stars.
Hmm.
So we are a nonprofit organization, but we are also a social enterprise in that we have a staffing arm. We're a staff augmentation business, just like any other staff aug. It's just that the proceeds come back and fund the training program.
Hmm.
But, I think that what was important in building that social capital and having technology folks connect to I.c.stars from the very beginning to now is if they were to invest in I.c.stars and help us develop relevant curriculum, volunteer to either teach a module or to do mock interviews or something like that, engage in the program, then we would be that much closer to employment.
Hmm.
And if everyone needs to find great, diverse talent, we should be the place to come. And so rather than in the traditional workforce way, we would say, please come and help and volunteer and sponsor and do all of these things. And it would be this sort of charity message.
Hmm.
Like by doing this, you're helping people get a job. You're helping, move people out of poverty. You're helping generations of, I think that that's all well and good. But it doesn't really have space in workforce development
Hmm.
because we don't work with charity. We do charity. And that once someone is stigmatized as part of that charity organization, their managers' expectations get lowered. People are like, oh, that's why you're here. And all of that stuff starts to happen. So for us, it was really important to position I.c.stars as not a charity, but as an investment, as an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of my motto is we've got to look good, feel good, and smell good, but at the end of the day, be good for your business.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it was about cultivating relationships with CIOs, chief information officers. And they love us because when they were coming up, they didn't come up in IT, right? The computer science degrees weren't even what they are today. And they all went to these boot camps like at GE or, it's like Continental Bank or even Anderson or Accenture. And so they come to I.c.stars and they remember what that felt like. Mm-hmm. And they're like, yes, this feels right. And they participate. And so we built a network of CIOs because they become our employers and everything else. But they also become the magnet that attracts all of the technology service providers. So if I can have an event quarterly that brings together 100 CIOs in any one of our cities, every technology service provider is going to want to be a sponsor to that because we've got 100 CIOs in the room. And then we'll cap it at 300 people. And so the ratio is really rich. You can meet your customers or your potential customers. Like if we can bring together buyers and sellers of technology, it's going to be good for their business. But the secret is that at every table, one of our alums or our interns is the person facilitating those connections. And so you can't for a minute forget that I.c.stars is in the center of that, and you're making an opportunity for your business and for the next generation to come. And so how we're able to cultivate all of those relationships is that every day we have something called high tea. We have a different business leader come to the table, share a pot of tea with our interns and their career story, like how they came to be. And so, on our side of the table, our job is to change perceptions about what it means to be a young person of color entering into IT. Yeah. I think these executives are coming to tea thinking that they're going to meet a bunch of kids and they're like, yo, we code. But instead, they're like, my gosh, they ask better questions than my management team. How do I hire from I.c.stars? How do I get my team engaged? And how do I support this organization? So every day, our students are doing a bit of business development while they're growing their network. And it's this really cool reciprocity enacted every day.
Very good. I caught that T at the end there.
That's I'm good. Punny today, see?
You're doing great. So how did all this change during the pandemic now? I mean, are you still doing the teas virtually or what's going on?
Yeah, so we've got a magnificent team who was able to take all of the I.c.stars magic and transport it online. So we haven't skipped a beat, and we still have tea every day. So, I'll invite you and all of your listeners to come and sign up for tea. You just have to bring your own tea.
Yeah, I brought my own tea to this. I was practicing. But yeah, that's good actually. So if someone wants to volunteer, or if there's an organization listening that wants to get involved, how would someone do that?
Sure. Well, you can go to our website, and it's the letter I, the letter C, stars.org, and sign up for tea. So we've got a sign up page where you work with your calendar and find just the right spot. Under engagement, it'll say high tea. And there's lots of different ways to engage too. So from high tea to volunteering, and now is a great time. One of the benefits of this crazy time of all of us being sort of, at home working is that we can have volunteers from anywhere in the world plug in. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's true. And so I think a lot of times people want to get involved in something, but they don't know how, or they don't know where to go, but now is a good time to do things that are remote like this.
Yeah,
for sure. That's a good point.
And it's also, I keep hearing from people how their volunteer experience over the past few months with I.c.stars was such a high spot, right, in their time, because they were engaging with someone that they'd never met before. They were having a diverse experience versus a philosophy. They were adding value and receiving value. And during these difficult times, that can really be quite a lift.
Yeah, it can. Well, one thing about just since last year and what went on with like Black Lives Matter and the different, movements that were, I would say, reignited, because I don't think there was ever not a movement. It's just that it became more present in people's minds who it wasn't necessarily like, I would say like someone like me, yes, I would always want equality, but it wasn't top of mind necessarily, right? Because it wasn't necessarily what was impacting me personally. And which is it's always hard to look at that and say that, but it's true. But after that, I think, a lot of people did a lot of reading and listening and watching. And one thing that really struck me was just how having diverse voices and having different voices in a room, or people who look different in a room, does change the conversation so much. And it does change the ideas, and it changes the solutions that people come up with and things like that. And have you had to have those conversations with CIOs or people in different levels, or is that something that generally people are aware of now? How has any of that changed, I guess?
Yeah, great question. I think that with the murder of George Floyd, there was a tipping point there. And to your point too, like, we don't care about anything until we really know it. Like, we know it in our heart. Like, we can even know it intellectually. But if it doesn't get down to our heart, we can't really participate. And I'll never forget the image of the policeman and his knee in his neck. And what was different about that image than all of the other murders that we've seen of Black bodies is that we saw his face. So it wasn't just like a man suffering or a man in trouble or a man being shot. We saw the face of evil. He looked straight into the camera, and the look on his face, it's like, still gives me goosebumps to think about it. Like that was what evil looked like, and I think it woke everybody up and said, oh my gosh, for the first time I'm realizing what that means. Black lives matter. That it's that these lives are disposable, right? Like that this life or death matters, and that we are destroying lives. We are killing people, and we are a part of the witnesses to what's happening. And everybody's waking up saying, this is absolutely wrong. And so, I've seen in the last few months, companies, individuals, like our volunteer engagement has soared, that people want to do something. People want to be a part of the solution, and people are saying, this is wrong. I want to be an ally. I want to be a part of the progress here. And so, on a very tangible level, we do cultural competency training for companies that may not be ready to be employers of I.c.stars talent because they don't have any diversity, because their entry-level managers might not have had a ton of training, a whole host of things. And so we help in that capacity, and we're seeing lots of interest in cultural competency, diversity training, those kinds of things, which is good. But then we're also seeing, uptick in hiring, like people saying, okay, well, let's put our money where our mouth is and let's hire diverse talent in our organizations. And so they're partnering with organizations like I.c.stars or Year Up or Perscolis, other, training organizations, to actually source talent and take a serious look at sourcing talent for the first time. And that's heartening. And then the third piece is, I think, there's a real need to develop people within an organization and to diversify the C-suite. And that doesn't happen until we develop people all the way through. Right. And so, I'm starting to see initiatives happening at that level as well.
Right. And this is one of the tougher things that I hear and then feel compelled to always say something about, is when someone says, well, we're just hiring people because they're not white. And I don't know that one always gets me. And my understanding is that it's really just looking for talent in different places and getting people who are qualified, but that aren't, the recruiters have a certain list of people that they're recruiting for example, and presenting. And are they presenting just a bunch of white guys, or are they presenting everyone, or what? And so I don't know. To me, it's just about sourcing properly. But can you give me your take on that?
Yeah, because the thing that's problematic about that statement, or the statement of, we're looking for the best possible applicant versus diversity, is because it implies that diversity is not the best talent, right? Or like your statement, like, oh, what? So we're just going to hire, like that we have to have substandard people if we go in a diversity direction. That's just like that's racist. That's the definition of racism. Right. And so, and so we have a lot of work to do around changing and shifting that. And the crazy thing about change is that, the beginning of change is conflict. When we get to a place that we just, the old ways of doing things aren't working anymore, that's conflict. Or we're sort of, some of us are holding on to the old ways because we're scared that there's fear, and some of us are pushing for the new ways. That's conflict. And so I think that the beginning of any change is it's uncomfortable. And actually, that's how we know it's working. Change is uncomfortable. And so the whole thing about hiring is to go out of the ways that we have traditionally hired is really uncomfortable, which is like, do you know anybody who's and we hire our friends, or we hire from the school that we went to, or we hire, and guess what? Like, it's going to be really hard to find that unicorn engineer from Stanford who is Latinx, or 10 of them,
right. Yeah.
So we have to widen our pool. I remember telling one business owner, she was like, I can't find talent. And what am I doing wrong, Sandee? I just diverse candidates are not applying here. And I said, well, let's look at your website, just a quick kind of look through, and everybody, all the people on the website were just like really happy white people. Like, just like, and like, we're so happy. And that, and like cute people, like it was very sunshiny. But, as a person of color, when I see that, what I see is these people are so happy that there's no black people to mess up their game. They're so happy that they're all the same and they don't have to, no, I'm kidding. But I think it is, if we can't see ourselves, there's an unwritten thing in there that says you don't really belong here. And this isn't going to be a good place for you. And so we skip over, just like in a job description as a woman, if we don't have 100% of the skills, we're kind of like pass. The same thing holds true, I think, with diverse candidates. And so it's going to take a lot to shift that mindset from, we're just going to, to actually doing the work. And it's going to require that we spend a little time being a little uncomfortable in the unknown.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having a lot of this discussion. Was hard. I mean, to me anyway, it's difficult just to ask the questions, and not feel like I'm some meme of like, oh, white person asking about diversity or whatever, Because, maybe I am that meme. I don't know. It's hard to say.
No, I mean, I think we have to have the conversations. Like this is right, and this interview, this conversation, this moment is going to impact other people who might be struggling with things, and so like I think it's a blessing and a great, like you're a champion if you're making difficult conversations happen so that other people can learn.
Okay, well, good, and I'm just excited that we've gotten to talk so much about your organization too, because I think it's wonderful and it was so exciting to hear about. So is there first of all, just to make sure, is there anything you wanted to cover that we didn't?
Yeah, I want to say two things. One is we have over 60 entrepreneurs in our alumni association. And the reason why that just makes me so happy is that they're entrepreneurs who have started businesses and are hiring people from I.c.stars or from the community, and really changing the game. And they're awesome. And then the other thing is, my other bragging thing is, we have over 70 homeowners in our alumni association. And so if you think about that for a second, it's people who are receiving public assistance are now homeowners. And moreover, they're buying homes in the communities that they came from. So we asked the question, what if we determine success not by getting out of the hood, but by investing back in? Uh-huh. How would that change our communities instead of like robbing our communities of their greatest assets? And that's the people. Like, oh, I'm out to buy homes, to start companies, to invest back in. And I think that that's how change happens. And so, that's why it's so important for I.c.stars to be focused on knowledge work. Is the average earning increase after 12 months is 400%. And that's a game changer in that financial capital space. And so, yeah, those are the things that I got to brag about.
Yeah, those are great. No, that's great. Those are like good infographic numbers. They make a nice, pretty picture. So do you have any like advice or a mantra that you want to share that maybe you looked to or was given to you?
Yeah, I think it's about visibility for all of us, whether it's, we're a minority gender or race or class. It's about being visible. And I'll tell you one more quick story. I promise this will be my last.
You're fine.
Okay, so years ago, I was managing the program and I was taking all of our interns to a networking event. And so we were at the Sears Tower in Chicago, it was like high up, incredible view. And as the students just started to do their networking thing, I kind of hung back and said, okay, good, And this woman came up to me and she said, so how do you like I.c.stars? She thought I was a student. And I was like, well, I like it very much. I'm actually the co-founder, and kind of laughed at the joke. And I think I may even made a joke about, I don't think I am smart enough to get into I.c.stars, And she said, well, can I talk to you for a minute in the hall? And I was like, yeah, sure. I made sure everybody was okay. Went with her in the hall. And then she proceeded to cuss me out. And I wasn't expecting it. It came out of nowhere. And so here's this woman just yelling at me and dropping like every kind of F-bomb there was. And I was like, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, is this person going to fight me? Like, do I have to take off my earrings? Like, how is this going to go? And then what's going to happen with my students? Like, what are they going to, are they going to come out and see me and like, get engaged in this thing with like, what? And then finally, I just got really quiet and listened to what it was that she was saying. And what I heard was this: how dare you be invisible? How dare you be invisible to all of us who thought that the only way we could start an organization like I.c.stars was to have a white lady with great shoes. How dare you be invisible to all of the students and future students who don't see you leading, who don't see that you are the co-founder of this organization. And I remember I was internal in operation. I wasn't like the face of I.c.stars. And of course it sounded like this. How dare you, beep, bleep, how dare you, da, 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 how dare you, and when it was all over, like my face was hot.
Yeah.
And I, took a deep breath and I said, thank you. And when I tell this story to young people, they're always like, what? You said, thank you. You didn't box her. You didn't and I said, no, I mean, I think that advice, that honesty was probably the most pivotal advice I got in my career. Because what happened next was, the other co-founder was leaving the organization, and she announced her leaving. And I was sitting at a board meeting, and she had already gone, and the board was talking about like, okay, what do we do? We're going to do an executive search. We'll do a national search for the next president of I.c.stars. And I was like, what? What are they talking about? I'm sitting right here. Like, it's me. Like, how are they going to say, like, what? And in my head, I'm having this whole conversation. Like, why on earth are they talking like this? Like, don't they see me?
Right.
Can't they see me? Am I invisible? And I was so upset that, like, it's one of those moments where you're either going to like cry or puke. Like so you like trying to hold everything in at the same time. And so I got up to leave, and I just kind of walked out the door. I was so upset, and like angry tears, like tears would fly out straight, not just roll down pretty.
Yeah.
And one of the board members came up behind me and he said, baby girl, you need to go back in there and get your job. Wow. And he didn't really sound like Steve Harvey, but I think it's fun to make it.
Yeah, it's your impersonation. That's the
So then I went back in and I said, I'm sorry, guys, but I'm the president of I.c.stars, and here's how it's going to go. And I just kind of like lined it out and was very calm. And then it was really quiet. And then the board was like, well, of course that's right. Okay, let's move on to the financials and blah, blah, blah. Like, it was like not a big deal at all. But in my mind, it was such a big deal, and it meant everything. And that lesson of how dare you be invisible almost changed the course of my career and everything else. And so it was a really powerful moment for me, and sort of claiming the role of president, and standing in who we are and being visible.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Yeah, because a lot of times all those feelings will happen, but you won't do anything about them. So you were empowered to do so. And the irony is that you had been so focused on empowering everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. So I have a series of questions that every guest gets asked called the Fun Five.
Okay.
So they're supposed to be fun. I have stressed a few people out with them. I did not mean to. So let's see. So 1, I don't know why I'm reading the numbers now, but 1, what's the oldest t-shirt you have and still wear? And the one I'm wearing today is 11 years old, I think, maybe 12. So just that's why I asked, to try to justify this wardrobe.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. I think I have an old Star Trek t-shirt that I still sleep in. That's gotta be like 10 years old. Nice. Yeah. And it's got the little, like, beat me up kind of.
Nice. If you ever can't sleep, you can just try to go.
I can go into the future.
So during the pandemic, especially, and I don't know if this question will change, but I might just keep it even after we're out of this. Every day just has seemed like Groundhog's Day. for a lot of people, maybe for you as well. So in that movie, Bill Murray has "I Got You, Babe" playing on his alarm clock every single morning. So what song would you have?
Oof. I feel like every day it's a different song. It's just like no 2 days are the same. But I would say the song for right now is like Sly and the Family Stone, old school. Everybody is a star. Like maybe that's the song of the week because I've been really focused on engagement and bringing everybody in.
Okay.
So that.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, and I have a Spotify playlist so for all the songs now, so it'll get added to that like when you're so it's kind of funny to hear the range of songs that people have chosen so far.
Nice.
So that's great because we don't have many like older ones. All right, very important question: coffee or tea or neither?
Oh, coffee in the morning, tea the rest of the day.
Okay, so you caffeinated tea or no?
Yeah. And remember, we're like tea snobs, so like we drink very fine teas at I.c.stars, nice loose teas.
Oh wow!
Like everybody has to know by the end of I.c.stars how to make a perfect pot of tea and how to give a gift.
Nice. No, that's great. Well, and especially, did you see there was a video where this British guy was like freaking out about how an American woman was making tea, like just lost his mind because she was putting milk first, doing all this stuff. So it's a good skill to have for international.
Absolutely.
Well. Can you think of something that makes you laugh so hard that you cry or just can't stop, or the last time that happened to you?
Okay, I have such a weird sense of humor. Have you watched the show Grace and Frankie?
Oh gosh, yes, I love that show.
Love it.
So good.
So I actually got to meet Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin years ago in Monterey, California, for a TED conference.
Oh, nice.
And we actually watched the Indigo Girls give a concert like together. And the funny thing was, I was like, I'm not going to take a selfie of me hanging out with Jane and Lily because we were like hanging out like, woo, you know, and because I didn't want to be like a dork and like, can I take a selfie? Like, and because we were really chilling and it was so much fun. I didn't want to. And now I'm like, if only I would have taken it. And okay. So that's what got me watching. And it was right before they launched the show, Grace and Frankie.
Yeah.
And so, okay, there's an episode where one of the daughter's boyfriends punches the meat in the restaurant. Like it makes me cry. I laugh and laugh. Just thinking about it makes me laugh. And it's the rules of comedy where you juxtapose something mundane with something that surprises you. Like that's why sometimes it's funny when people fall, right? Because they were standing upright and then all of a sudden it's whoop, boom, you know? And so the meat, like the punching of the meat, like just destroyed that relationship, everything in one night because, you know, oh my gosh, that makes me laugh.
That's great. I was like, oh, which, because there's a few things in that show that are pretty.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, it's so funny. I know. All right. And you kind of actually talked a little bit about this earlier, but who inspires you right now?
It is our alums.
Mm-hmm.
They inspire me. Like, just like I said, every day. You know, it's in the stories of how they're impacting others. That's incredible. So I know I promised no more stories, but here it is. So one of the women in I.c.stars, she was really struggling with one of her leadership behaviors. And it was around reciprocity. And it was just really hard for her to kind of think outside of herself and keep going. And so it was a real path to build for that. And frankly, I didn't think she would make it. And so she did not hit residency. After the 4-month internship, then people are invited to come into residency. And she, unfortunately, was not invited. But she continued to do her work and to do technology and everything else. And one day she emailed me and asked me to do a speaking event for her in 8 months. And so this is a trick that my dad uses, right? Book her for so far in advance she couldn't possibly have a conflict.
Yeah.
And then it'll be in stone, right? So 8 months come. It's a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning. It's way across town. And I'm grumpy, getting there, rah, rah, this is my Saturday morning. And so I get to the library and there's a child who meets me at the door and says, "Are you Miss Sandee?" And I'm like, "Yes." And she's like, "Come with me, please." And then she starts asking me some questions like, "What's a fun fact about you that maybe people don't know?" And what, and I was like, "This is so strange. Where's Christina?" So then we open the door and there are 12 beautiful little girls and a pot of tea.
Oh.
And Christina had been teaching these girls web development. And every time they had their Saturday morning class, they would start by having high tea. And she had invited me as a speaker, just like we invite speakers all the time. And I was blown away. Not only were the kids so beautiful and smart and wise, and the tea was pink. I don't even know how they found tea, little girl tea. And I was just she had come 360 degrees. That was it. She had literally done reciprocity in such a profound way. And the websites that these girls were building and the apps they were building were amazing and meaningful and impactful. It was all there in that Saturday morning with the pink tea.
Wow. Well, this is the first time someone has actually, I welled over a little bit. So good for Christina. No, that's a great story.
And then she made residency, of course.
She did. Well, good. Good. Then there's redemption too.
Yes.
Reciprocity and redemption.
Yes.
Well, that's awesome. That was worth you lying to me about your story.
Good.
Great. Well, Sandee, that's all my questions. Is there anything you just want to make sure people see? And we'll have it in the show notes too, but that you want to leave them with?
I want to thank you for this time. This was a really fun conversation. I forgot we were doing an interview. And I think, again, I would just reiterate this idea of being visible and being seen and being who we are.
Great. All right. And I'll have the link to I.c.stars, but thank you so much. This was wonderful for me. So I appreciate you.
Yay. I appreciate you.
Thanks for joining me this week. You can find out more about our guest in the show notes. The music you're probably moving to by now is by Joe Mafia. Find him on Spotify. That's Joe, Maffia. And Rob Metke is responsible for our visual design. You can find him online by searching for Rob, Metke. Thanks, Rob. Let us know who you'd like to hear from or about your own experiences defining yourself outside of work at More Than Work Pod on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Give us a follow. Or visit our website at rabiasaid.com. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to More Than Work. We'll be back next week with another guest. In the meantime, while being kind to others, don't forget to be kind to yourself.